So please welcome to the stage with myself, my second panel for the afternoon. So I'm joined by Martin Tugwell from Transport for the North, Kamal Panchal from the Local Government Association, and Anne Shaw from Transport for West Midlands. So thank you very much for joining me here. I want to start in a similar vein and just ask my panellists to give me a couple of minutes to highlight the headline challenges and opportunities that they see for your own organisations in the context of transport decarbonisation. And Martin, you're smiling at me nicely, so I'm going to start with you at that end.
Well, thank you and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to be here. I'm going to put the context of net zero in the context within which TFN operates. We are a statutory body set up by government, focused on unlocking and realising the economic potential of the North. And when we updated our strategic transport plan recently, the scale of the prize is huge. 118 billion additional pounds per year if we get this right by 2050. In comparison, that's about another third on our existing regional economy. And at the heart of that is achieving it in a more sustainable way. So net zero is very much at the heart of that, as set out by our regional decarbonisation strategy. But equally important is the third element there, and doing it in a way that is socially equitable. And so if I think about where we're moving forward at the moment, I look at what's happening. We've got double the amount of EVs in the North over the last few years, but it's still only 3% of the population in terms of vehicles. We've doubled, if not more, the number of chargers in the last couple of years. But it still needs 12 times that number by 2030 if we're going to be anywhere near the requirement. We need enough power, an additional enough power of 5,500 gigawatt hours. To put it into context, that's an additional 1.4 million homes, about another 25% on top of what we've already got in terms of the power. So there's some big issues in that. The scale of the challenge, even where we are promoting modal shift, we have constraints in terms of what we can achieve at the moment. The West Coast Main Line, it's constrained by energy. We won't be able to address the energy supply challenges on the West Coast Main for about 4 years. If you look at the road sector, we have to, as I say, achieve a significant step change there. But for me, and probably one of the things we can explore later is how we use collaboration to get there. Because probably the biggest challenge is how do we make this socially equitable? And if I look back at what we've done, work with our citizens panel across the North, which is trying to hear the voice from those communities that aren't actually heard very often. We talked to the low paid and the carers. 1 in 4 are actually worried about, can they afford to live? Can they afford to pay for their food before they even get to transport? So have a conversation with those people about how we're going to encourage them to use EVs, which for them may well be out of their reach financially, and actually what they've got at the moment in terms of their transport is just about managing to keep themselves above board. So I think there's huge opportunities, Angela. Technically, we know the answers. We can work on what we're doing in the North on collaboration, and we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. But let's kid ourselves. The scale of the challenge and the pace that we need to do. But I really do think we haven't thought through enough about the social equitability of this and the challenge that brings, because where you make change, we need to take people with us. And at the moment, those people quite often are actually just struggling to get by.
Thank you. Yeah, we touched on the social social equitability a word? I think I've just made something up, but the social equity is a really important point, Martin. I'd like to come back to that in a moment, but first I will invite Kamal to give you your thoughts.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, Local Government Association, so we represent every local authority in England and Wales, all bar 2. And if you ask me afterwards, I'll tell you which 2 they are. Yeah, so it was pleasing this morning to hear from the Minister that he sees very much local government as a key partner in this and a key partner in delivery of the transition to net zero transport. But clearly we have got some many challenges ahead, some of which Martin alluded to. But it won't surprise you to hear from me to say that, well, we've got to get onto some sort of sustainable funding footing for the next few years. So if you're not aware already, I mean, since 2010 and to about 2022, local government had around approximately £24 billion taken out of its sort of spending power, which obviously has impact. It's forced transition of many services. On top of that now, if any of you read our white paper and our spending submission, we're facing a £6.2 billion funding gap over the next couple of years. And a lot of this has come from spending pressures on things like adult social care, children's services, but also homelessness, dealing with the refugee crises, lots of these sort of issues. And so that in itself causes a problem because it puts a squeeze on on our ability to fund other services. But it's not just about quantum, it's about the nature of funding. That squeeze has meant we've been ever more reliant on central government grants, perhaps other sources of income as well. But that often that funding is fragmented, it's short term, it's quite lumpy, imbalance between capital and revenue. So it's quite difficult. That leads to subsequent issues over the years around capacity and capability. Probably with capacity being an issue. I mean, if you think back, 10, 15 years ago, there weren't many local authorities that were dealing with, trying to implement, find EV charging solutions for on-street charging. That's the thing now. Micromobility, so all this new technology that's sort of coming our way and these new transport trends. They're not part of that sort of statutory function, and yet we've got a responsibility because these are the services that people want and we're going to need if we're going to decarbonise. So, and being in a place, want to be in a situation where we can, when those opportunities do arise, say more funding rise, we want actually to have the staffing in place and the skills in place to actually capitalise on those, not trying to catch up with getting those in place. And then the other challenge is inconsistency of government messaging. We've seen a fair bit of that over the last few years, flip-flopping of policy, proactive travel to pro-motorists. It's not where we want to be, and we don't want those sort of battles. It's challenging enough to get the balance right locally without having these additional pressures from the top. And just quickly on opportunities, because I think there are opportunities. Well, I think, hearing from the Minister earlier today, the messaging seems to be very positive in terms of understanding and respecting the role of local government and the critical role that it has to play, more of an equal partner. And I think there's definitely intentions there to, promise of longer-term funding certainty as well. So I think that's good. And if any of you have seen the response, the consultation on the National Planning Policy Framework as well, and you see the direction of travel is very much around vision-led sort of transport planning, and I think that is very much the right place to go. And it's not, it's about avoiding problems and storing up problems for the future. And then finally, I think there's opportunities around technology. Better use of data, digital technology, artificial intelligence can help accelerate improvements and the behaviour change that we want. But we know we can't, local government cannot, it's impossible to do this on our own. We need to be able to work in collaboration with the likes of yourselves. But we can only do that if, with your expertise, but we need the conditions that we can work with you. That means things like long-term funding certainty and so on, so we can attract the right sort of levels of investment and skills. And before, as I finish, co-design. We must be able to sort of co-design things with central government and not just sort of leave it to central government Whitehall officials to do that for us. Thank you.
Thank you. A lot to think about and unpack there in a moment. But before we do that, I'd like to hear thoughts from yourself, Anne.
Okay, so thank you for inviting me today. It's quite good to be here. And I'm that sort of layer of local government that's between the sub-regional transport bodies and then the local authorities. So Transport for West Midlands as a a transport authority and part of a mayoral combined authority as well. So we don't just think about transport, we're thinking about how transport changes the lives of people for the better, and then that covers a whole range of things about how we improve people's health through different ways of travel, emissions as a big part of that as well, and how we make sure that we're growing the economy in a sustainable way, again, just to improve the lives of everybody who lives in the West Midlands. So 3 million people that we're trying to move around our region, or to create the places that they live in better as well. And of course, many businesses are dotted around sort of key advanced manufacturing businesses, as well as other plans around what we're doing. I think we're still trying to get a gigafactory in Coventry as well. So if anybody's interested in talking to us about that, we will quite happily do that with you, with our colleagues at Coventry City Council. We're responsible for setting the statutory transport policies. We are waiting for the LTP guidance. I'm sure we will get it soon, but we haven't stood still while we're developing that. We've put in all of the things with the discussions that we've had with our colleagues in DFT about what we know would be in there anyway. And of course, that transition to decarbonise the transport system to support that sustainable economic growth as well. I'm also going to touch on the point of equity as well, because Martin talks about that really well, but 27% of the people in the West Midlands cannot afford a car. So if we're just going to be thinking about car trips and how people do that, is completely inequitable. And of course, you've got the whole range in an urban area of the different kinds of properties that people live in. And we heard a little bit about the challenges around that as well. So public transport, walking, cycling, and creating great places where people are safe to do that is what we are also about as well. So growing our bus networks. We heard Rebecca earlier talk about the constraints that we've got in our bus network, not just rural but in the cities as well. They're stuck in traffic, really inefficient for the people who are using our buses, and that's turning people away from getting on board. We can't do that. We need to encourage more people to use public transport. If I just give you some stats, we've actually decided that 2041, West Midlands 2041 plan is when we're going to try and meet the national targets around decarbonisation. But in terms of transport, that would mean a 30% reduction in car travel trips, the distance that cars travel. That's quite a challenge. A 50% reduction in people making shopping trips as well. And what we're seeing with more and more people ordering online, I think that is going to be a challenge as part of that. We need to see a 100% increase in public transport use, a 700% increase in cycling, and a 5 to 6 year acceleration of EV uptake. It's not all bad news. We are doing some things about that as well. And we've got lots of things that we're doing in terms of improving the transport infrastructure. So creating those dedicated bus lanes so that buses can be freed up, they become reliable, they become faster than the car, and people can use them for the journeys that they want to make. 80% of our public transport trips by bus, really important. And the West Midlands has got the largest bus network outside of London as well. And then we're also investing in our bus fleets with our operators, Coventry, all electric city, talking to my colleagues who are here today. So about 65% of that bus network is now electrified, and we're planning to be 100% electrified, I think, by 25, 26. I'm looking for nods of the head. Thank you. So that's what we're doing around that. We've also been experimenting with some hydrogen buses as well, highly problematic in terms of the fuel supply, and we've been working through some Zebra stuff as part of that. But again, going back to car trips, I think somebody said earlier, they are still part of our journeys that people make. We can't ignore them. And we're trying to stimulate electric charging in places where maybe industry itself would not want to invest because the viability is not quite there yet. So partnerships that we're creating with acquiring sites, a project called EV Cats. We're acquiring sites, developing a partnership with some suppliers, so removing some of the barriers in areas where actually we're trying to tackle some of that equity around how people can access cars. And then the last point I'll just make, some of the stuff that we're doing, we call them travel points. You may know them as travel hubs. So some areas, we've got some pilots out in our local authority areas, which are where you can pick up a bike hire, you can pick up an e-scooter where the pilots are running. We still haven't got the regulations around those either, or a hire car as well. So we're looking at ways in which we can make hire cars available to other people who don't have access to a car in any other way as well. We've got Lillian Greenwood there today, actually, who's going out to have a look at those pilots, and we're planning to deploy more and more of those. They're for the more local journeys to help us with some of those targets about how we're reducing the percentage of car miles that are travelled as part of that as well. So there's a huge amount of stuff that, as a transport authority, part of a combined authority, working in partnership with our local authorities to develop ways in which we can decarbonise the transport system. I will just mention one other thing which I don't think has really been touched on much today as well. We're also responsible for quite a large infrastructure investment. I've talked about the road stuff that we're doing to support buses. We're also building more train stations, and we're extending our tram network as well. But our procurement techniques in terms of how we are looking at the whole life cycle of construction, from not just what the contractors are providing, the vehicles that they're using, etc., but also the materials as well. So we're also investing in some innovation through the Adept Live Labs, which is a DFT funded programme, looking at different materials, decarbonising road resurfacing, for example, as well. So there's quite a lot of activity that's going on in the West Midlands. We do it collaboratively, of course, with all of our other combined authorities. So.
Wow, yes. There's a lot of things to get our heads around there, and a lot of things to unpack. But I think for me what you really highlight is the whole role of the consumer in this. So thinking about the end user, we talk a lot about transport decarbonisation, but in reality, we do need to think about the end users and the individuals who are going to be using the transport, whether they're using public transport, whether they're purchasing their own vehicles. And actually the challenge that we have with, once we've got through that, the innovators, the early adopters, and we're trying to bring the mass market along, as you so eloquently put, Martin, that there are a lot of people who are actually struggling to eat and live, let alone then think about an alternative form of transport that gets us towards our net zero goal. So I think a lot of things to unpack here, but I'd really like to start by asking, we've talked about those challenges, but how do we even begin to start tackling some of these issues? What do you need to start moving along that journey to support that transition?
So maybe if I just sort of share the journey we've been on in the north, because underpinning the strategic transport plan is that focus on outcomes. And if you start focusing on outcomes, you start thinking about system thinking and system planning and system delivery. So when we were starting to look at the needs and the requirements for EV infrastructure, the way we did that is to start by setting up an EV regional partnership. That involves not just the local authorities, it has the national grid, it has the DNOs, it has the Energy Savings Trust, it has National Highways and National Network Rail on it. Actually, it has Ordnance Survey on it. One of the things that we do as a sub-national transport body is we are a repository of knowledge, data, and experience and knowledge. So that knowledge around what is actually there at the moment, not just in terms of transport, but in terms of the networks, the distribution networks for electricity, are all part of what feeds into what we call the EV charging infrastructure framework. And it's a framework that not only works in the north, that we've been asked to roll it out across the rest of England, and indeed have got Wales government interested in it. And the key here, Angela, is it starts giving you a sense of data. It starts giving you an understanding about how trends in terms of ownership, both individuals and fleet, it allows you to plug in socio-economic factors. Don't ask me why we did it. We actually mapped every single drive in the entire north. So we've got that through a partnership with the Ordnance Survey. So in terms of current opportunities, but then because we run big models looking at future travel demand, we've got all the future development logged. We know where things are going to change and they're going to happen over the time. So the spatial development, the spatial data is all there. Now, what that started to then do is it's led to a different conversation with the energy sector. And if you're watching what's happening through the work of Ofgem, they are moving forward with what they're calling regional energy supply partnerships. And a lot of that's come out of the work that's been done by the subnational transport bodies, working with the energy sector about how do you deliver this outcome, which is a decarbonised transport system. And again, just to emphasise the importance of data, which Kamal touched upon, when the Ofgem guys were looking at what they needed to put something together for the north, they got 80% of their data from what we'd already done. So you're starting to see collaboration around data. You're starting to see the collaboration between the transport and the energy sectors. And the drive and the focus here is about how do we deliver outcomes. So I think that's a really strong foundation on which to engage. It also allows an engagement with those investors and what we're starting to see, because again, all of the work we do, it's publicly funded, so it's publicly available, and we make our work and our data available through what we call the TFN offer. So all of our partners are able to access it. Increasingly, we're seeing the private sector using that data, using that information to be able to drive their own investment plans. And that clarity and that confidence then hopefully gives them confidence to invest in the infrastructure we need.
No, fantastic. And from your perspective, Anne, I mean, great targets that you've got there for the West Midlands to head towards. You know, what's your roadmap? How are you going to implement those, and what do you need from both government and collaborations to help you get there? Because there's some big things that you're trying to achieve.
So this is really challenging, I think. And if we adopted the 2050 target, I think, you know, you'd have a longer time to achieve it. But that's the date that we're trying to stick to. I think it comes with how we make sure that we can align the collaboration with all of our local authority partners and of all of our regional businesses, as well, national businesses. And we work with our sub-regional transport bodies as part of this as well. But I think the difficulties that we've had is it's not just about what we do in terms of infrastructure. So there's a huge amount of work to be done about behaviour change and acceptance. Getting more people onto buses, you know, requires people to actually quite like buses. You know, some of the people who've been using some of the electric buses in Coventry, they're amazed. They're like very quiet and very smooth. So it's quite a nice journey, and they're very plush as well, as most modern buses are. I will just advocate for that. So please, we've just finished Catch the Bus month. I don't know how many of you caught the bus last month, but we'll check later. Good, well done. But the issue that we've had really is the certainty of funding. I think particularly around buses, the revenue funding or the operational requirements from public support to keep our bus networks working is really quite difficult. Since COVID, and probably before COVID, to be honest, it's been on a really difficult trajectory. Patronage has gone down. We're actually seeing in the West Midlands patronage going up. We're sort of operating about an 88% network to what we had before COVID, and we're carrying 90-odd% of passengers before COVID as well. So more people on less buses, if you see what I mean. But we need to make sure that we're keeping them working. We need to make sure that they're affordable and accessible. But the barriers, I think that was the main point of the question, but the barriers that we face is the lack of and Kamal touched on this, the lack of funding in the public arena to support locally the networks that we need to keep running in terms of our public transport. Not just running, but also transitioning those vehicles as well. Most combined authorities or transport authorities, regional transport authorities are thinking now about franchising of bus networks. And that would support bus operators. They would also have certainty. There are different opinions, but they would have certainty about what services are going to operate, how they're going to be funded, and takes away some of the uncertainty about reducing patronage and profitability, etc. as well. But then the assistance that also helps to provide in fleet transitions slightly faster. And then some of the other barriers around depots, so where current depots are on our bus network, not necessarily in the right location for electrification. We need to put them somewhere else. It all fits in with the planning system around what else is being developed in our regions as well. But that long-term certainty over sustainable funding, both to develop the infrastructure plans, not just transport, but the energy infrastructure, the supply chain, being able to gear up to deliver that as well, and the skills which we mentioned earlier today as well are really important. And then the investment in existing and new infrastructure, that means that we can offer a transport system that works in a region for everybody, and we can make some of those targets about reducing private car miles and other things as well, which will help us to reach some of those targets. But it's a challenge, but I think it's a challenge. If we don't set ourselves, we're not going to achieve it. So.
No, absolutely. And just on that point around funding, we heard from the Minister earlier today about greater devolution to local authorities. And do you think that's going to make it easier or harder? And what are your views on how you can then work with central government to move that agenda forwards?
Yeah, asking the LGA about devolution can always be a tricky subject. But no, it is inevitably, it's been happening, and we have seen more, combined authorities and mayoral combined authorities, and more seem to be emerging every week or different proposals. And I think that will inevitably help, because we're talking about creating the framework for closer collaboration across different across neighbouring authorities, but also within authorities, and hopefully that should then create the conditions not for greater efficiencies, doing things by scale, but also being able to attract the right sort of skills and capacity into those areas as well. Now, with funding, it obviously remains to be seen. I know that I think I'm right in saying that when the last government introduced the CRSTS, the City Regional Sustainable Transport Settlement. Yeah. That was quite an uplift. It was an uplift in funding for those areas, and the government recognised the importance, particularly that the local transport authorities could play in delivering the transport improvements locally, which is great for those areas, but we need to see that everywhere else. And what we're hoping is that sort of devolution brings with it two further things. Is that one is around consolidation of funding and less fragmentation, greater long-term certainty. But also, there's other things that I'd quite like to see as well, which are not often talked about, but little sort of powers and flexibilities to do things locally. And many of those are sort of left to central government still, like introducing a workplace parking levy. You have to have Secretary of State sign-off for that. It's like, why?
Yeah, actually, you led really nicely into my next question was going to be, what financial models or powers are needed to accelerate this transition at the local level? And
that's one of them. There are things that exist where more and more places could be driven to look at these other different sort of finance models, but these are really difficult because, like we said before about road user charging and so on, they're just incredibly difficult to take people with you. But there's, I think with longer term funding certainty, that should help in levering in more private investment. When we don't have longer term funding certainty, it's very difficult to bring partners on board with you for the long term. So there's some of that, and there's got to be some innovations and which go beyond myself. Sorry, Martin, I can since he wants to come in, but I think there's got to be some other funding models.
Yeah.
So I think there's a couple of things for me. I mean, just as an example, I always like examples as to show how we need to change. So I was involved in conversations like probably Anne and Kamal were in with the previous government around getting more EV chargers in place. And it was driven by how many chargers could you get. So that was the reason for doing it. And you had this ludicrous situation, in my view, this ludicrous situation where there was one part of government saying we need to get more more chargers available for people parking on the street. And then I was thinking, there's another part of government that's saying we need to avoid the situation where there's lots of cars blocking pavements. And we worry about, and then you get send the message to people about you have to have a charger for your own vehicle. Well, the last time I looked, I didn't have a petrol station for my car. So there's something here also about education. We've got a picture painted in popular culture that you have an EV and you need to have your own charger. You need to charge it regularly. Well, as vehicles and technology becomes more established, as the ranges and the endurance becomes longer, that isn't what the driver should be. So I think that's a really strong reason why the route of devolution, combining funding streams into a single pot that allows those best placed to shape their communities and to work with the private sector, is a really important part of this. But equally, I think there's a role for the public sector to kind of reach out to the private sector and say, how do we do this in partnership? Because again, we're quite often very good in this country of assuming that any change has to come because the public sector makes the investment. It can be a catalyst, it can be a driver of change, can pick up those areas which are requiring something because of a market failure. But fundamentally, the infrastructure that we use has been brought by and large because of private investment. And we need to rediscover the kind of relationship and partnership, which, as Kamal says, becomes easier if you've got a public sector and say, here's our share, here's our contribution. More importantly, here's the leadership we're providing for our community as to where we want to be. Come and join us on that journey.
So I guess that's the very essence of what we're doing around what we call the EV CATS project. So it's targeting areas where it wouldn't happen just alone with private industry. It's where we're putting in the upfront investment to acquire those sites in areas where there is limited off-street charging for properties as well, and bringing a private sector investor along with us to do that, and then creating a place actually as part of that where you can do other things. So it's creating the opportunity for local people to charge somewhere not outside their house where they can do those things as well. And then the travel points as well. They're not just about providing some vehicles. I think we will also be incorporating some electric charging points as part of those as well. So it's a complete travel hub where you can do many different things. But Martin's absolutely right. The public sector can provide the kickstart to some of these things, but we need the private sector to really then start to pick up and do those, because we heard that, you know, public money at the moment is limited. We don't know what will happen at the budget on the 30th of October. I think that's something that we're all keeping a close eye on. But if we can provide a catalyst for the private sector to be able to then have that confidence and that long-term certainty about certain things, I think that's a really important thing.
No, thank you. What I'd like to do now is open the floor to questions, because I'm sure we've probably got quite a few people wanting to ask. So if we could start with the gentleman second in. I think you were the first one to pop your hand up. Be great.
Hello, Dominic Schofield from Cenex. I'd like to come back to the question of buses, and particularly the empty rural buses and getting more people into them. I spent a very nice afternoon yesterday visiting the travel points that Anne's got in Transport for West Midlands. And I've been having conversations with a number of sort of stakeholders in this area over recent sort of months about the potential to perhaps streamline rural bus services a bit so that they become more frequent and faster, but then thinking about other means of people accessing those smaller number of quicker routes. So things like travel points, but you know, looking at bus stops, bus shelters as mobility hubs of some sort, so that you can provide other ways for people to access those bus services and thereby get more people onto them. I have two questions that come out of that. So the first is, I'm interested in what level of engagement the panel feel that they've had from the bus companies. So in looking at things like mobility hubs and micromobility and other mobility solutions that might link in with the bus network, have you had good engagement with the bus operators themselves? Have they sort of seemed to be open to that? And then the second question is, do you think with some of the new powers, like, for example, franchising, that will enable you to do more down that route? And is that a sort of a direction of travel that maybe you're looking at and, you know, trying to sort of integrate the services more?
Thank you. Should we start with the engagement question first with bus operators?
It's a great question about engagement with bus operators. It's probably not their primary focus, I would suggest. Doesn't mean to say that they wouldn't be engaged, and particularly where we're experimenting with more demand responsive type services as well. So how do they support rural, smaller numbers of people making longer journeys actually on a rural network to wherever they need to go as well. So we have been trying to work with our bus operators with a demand responsive transport service, which is providing some of those less traditional routes as well. So not necessarily a fixed route, but a sort of fixed route which people can call up and make use of as well. Introducing those into travel hubs would be a part of that as well. But we're just piloting some of the initial things that you obviously saw yesterday as well. So the potential is there. The engagement with bus operators at the moment is predominantly around the franchising, but I'll leave that because you wanted to talk about. I don't know whether Martin wanted to come in on that as well.
my observation, I would just take a step back. So I think as a profession, we're very good at knowing what we know and thinking about how we can apply what we know today. And the reason I say that is Rule 101 in transport planning is travel's a derived demand. We have a problem with our travel system, with transport system. But we try and solve those problems come because of the way our lives are about, where our children go to school, where we get services from. There's been quite fundamental changes in the pattern of life and the way of life. That change is different for different people. We touched on already about the social equity issue. I think we need to start stepping back and just understanding or making sure we understand the question first, because actually some of those needs that are on those empty buses, or those few people on those buses, actually what are they trying to get access to? What is their reason for travelling? Because it might be about regenerating a market town. It might be about creating, as you've seen on some community rail partnerships, you might be about using redundant station buildings so they're in the community so you can travel by I think we look for the solution. We know the solutions we know, and we then try and apply them to a world which has changed quite dramatically, not just because of COVID, but because of the way businesses and services run. So for me, I come back to the fundamental change that underpins our strategic transport plan. It's about outcomes. It's about system thinking. And that's a challenge for all of us in this sector, to start thinking differently and to actually stop and ask, what is it that communities are looking for? And then thinking about how we can tap into some of the creativity to deliver a solution they actually need, rather than one that the profession thinks they need.
Thank you. Please, Kamal.
Little to add to that, except that we are aware that DfT are looking into the whole area of enhanced partnerships, which is how most services are still delivered under that model. There's only London and there's Manchester at the moment that do the franchising. So, and there is a review of that going. And when I talk to sort of colleagues in local authorities, transport authorities, they do say that experience of collaboration is variable. And that's not a big surprise, because it's a partnership. And they do say, in some areas it's brilliant when they have meetings. There's a buzz about those meetings, and there's a willingness to cooperate and find solutions together. And others will say, well, it's like pulling teeth. It's really difficult. They're switched off, etc. So hopefully the review will unearth some of the reasons why that is, and I know we want to see an improvement to that sort of model of working, because I think it'll be a long time before if we ever see the whole country covered in sort of franchising model of bus provision, and it's not the right answer for everywhere anyway. But yeah.
Thank you. Gentleman on the end there, please.
Hello, James Barwise, Road Haulage Association. My question, unsurprisingly, is about trucks and how the planning system can go from being a barrier to an enabler of decarbonisation. Some of the work that's coming out from the STBs is really encouraging in terms of looking at how HGVs can decarbonise, looking at potential sites for green infrastructure, rapid charging points, that sort of thing. But then when we look at local authorities and their emerging spatial plans, that vision isn't captured in terms of site allocations, where we want to put these charging sites. My gut tells me it's because their thinking isn't really strategic. So my question for the panel is, how is that sort of strategic thinking cascaded to the local level, so it's then captured in specific sites and then we start to see those charging points? Thank you.
Who'd like to comment on that one first?
I know Martin will have quite a bit to say about this, but I think what we are starting to see through the work that's happening around bringing forward a devolution bill is actually, I mean, I'm a transport person, but you can't deliver transport without having real cognizance of what your spatial planning is all about. But they're done separately. Even in county and two-tier authority areas, planning and transport are done separately as well. So the opportunity to create a spatial plan and a transport plan together that are really working together. I'm looking forward to seeing and how that is covered by the devolution bill as part of that. And the ability, so we talked about bus depots, we need to do the same for freight and haulage, not just in the long distance journeys, but the consolidation in sort of more congested urban areas, city centres, etc. And then how do you do that last mile from consolidation sites and stuff like that as well. So the delivery of goods is just as important as the delivery of people to where they want to go as well. And it's very often a forgotten thing when we're talking about economic growth. So, but the supply chain through the road freight hauliers and also on our rail networks, and then the sites from our, the container sites within our rail network as well. Really important about how we think about goods and services. Goods and services are actually what makes our economy.
I think there's two things for me. One is I come back to the role of subnational or pan-regional bodies to be kind of those sources of trusted evidence. So I touched about how when we updated the strategic transport plan, it was on the basis of our understanding of the economy, of the environment and our society. So the TFN's work on the STP is underpinned by, it's a snappy title, the Northern Powerhouse Independent Economic Review. It's not far short of a regional economic strategy in all but name. It looks at the key sectors, it looks at the understanding. And I totally agree with Anne that one of the challenges for us all moving forward is, we talk about the need to economic growth, and we then produce our plans, and we all sort of rush into thinking about where the next housing development is going to be, which is important. But if your driver is the economy, it's where are the economic growth centres? Where are the gateways, the ports, the airports? Always remembering that airports and freight through airports is really important. It might not be quite as big as a 44-ton lorry, but it's really important, high value, certainly in some of the electronics and pharma sectors. So I think our role is about providing that underpinning. Our role is about using our technical expertise to have that data, the EV charging infrastructure framework that allows the conversations to be had. And I think it is a bit of a trickle down, but we work, I mean, Anne says, you work with Midlands Connect very closely on such things. We work with our partners across the north. And it's providing that information and insight that allows this thinking to come into fruition. Because if we don't, then we won't see the benefit of the economic uplift that we're actually trying to achieve. So I think, again, there's a bit of a shift in thinking that needs to be happening, perhaps. Like I said, for housing development, I get it, it's important, but the economic driver comes from the business community and understanding how their needs are going to change. And how they need to be met in the future.
Brilliant. Now we're coming towards the end of time. So sorry, Kamal, was there one quick thing you wanted to add?
No, it's fine.
Okay. But I will ask for one quick thing from each of you, just something to leave the audience with. So back to the question I asked earlier about financial model or power that would be needed to accelerate the transition to decarbonisation from a local perspective. Just one key thing from each of you, just to leave that in the minds of the audience today. So let's start with you, Anne.
So further devolution to local areas, so city regions, mayoral combined authorities, sub-regional transport bodies, is really important. Without that further devolution, we can't make the difference in our own areas as well. And then aligned with that, it would be long-term sustainable funding so that we know that we have certainty about the things that we can deliver.
Fantastic. Come on.
Well, that and really about definitely sorting out the long-term funding issue, and that's not just about more money, but actually, is there a better way of managing, particularly the demands, the huge demands that are placed on local authorities that are squeezing out those resources into be able to do the other things that our people and residents want. So I think that's the key thing. I will add one other thing, is that just resetting that relationship between central and local government so that we're much more involved in the designing of things like funding and policy, and it's not just done by people in Whitehall.
And finally, Martin.
So building on both Anne and Kamal, I think it's a combination of getting a really clear monitoring and evaluation of what we are doing, because at the moment, as I said at my introduction, what we know we need, and it's not an ambition, it's what we need, and what we're delivering is nowhere near good enough. It's nowhere near fast enough, and it's nowhere near going to be able to actually achieve what we're trying to set. So there's a credibility, and we use monitoring and evaluation to hold ourselves as to what we need to invest. But the fundamental thing for me is a shift in thinking about us, away from modes, away from silos, to thinking about what outcomes do we want in places, and empower the leaders to be able to provide that vision, and then to be empowering them to deliver it on the ground for people and businesses.